Good afternoon. My name is Ellen Comisar, and I am delighted to be here today with Lionel Shriver, whose latest book is called, oops, I'm always bad at this, Mania. Just came out this past Tuesday, and it's a wonderful read, and I'm delighted to have Lionel with us. Just by way of introduction, for those of you who are frequent flyers on the Blaze community, we welcome you back. For those of you who are new, we're glad to have you here. A Mighty Blaze is an organization of 30 or so professional creative types who came together at the onset of COVID to make sure that readers and authors were connecting. We have a number of shows every week. It's all free, and we love bringing you these shows and introducing you to our authors. If you don't already subscribe to our newsletter, please do so. You'll get the whole range of shows that are available. You can do that at our website, www.amightyblaze.com. And we are all over social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. So please follow us there. And of course, go to our YouTube channel where this interview will live live forever and where you can subscribe and see all of our previous shows. So we're here today to talk about Mania, and which just came out, and the praise for this has been great. And I'm going to try to get my husband to take the dog away because she's in the background. So Readers First, which is an online book reviewing community, says Lionel Shriver turns her piecing gaze on the policing of opinion and intellect and imagines a world in which intellectual meritocracy is heresy. It's hilarious, deadpan, and scathing, and at times frighteningly plausible. John Cleese, not one of my favorite comedians and actors, says Seldom is a book as funny and important and timely. I was laughing out loud at the same time my blood was running cold. And the last quote I'll provide, there were so many good ones to choose, comes from the Washington Post Review, said the specifics of Mania are the stuff of bleeding satire, but the novel's guiding concept cuts close to the bone with no anesthesia. Shriver isn't one to tiptoe around her subjects. She still knows how to poke the bear. In this case, the bear is us. And Lionel has a long and illustrious career, both as a novelist and nonfiction writer, as well as a journalist. And I will read her very clever bio to her book Mania, which is, you will understand more so as we get going. Although Lionel Shriver has published many novels, a collection of essays, and a column in The Spectator since 2017, and her journalism has been featured in publications including The Guardian, The New York Times, and The Wall Street Journal, she in no way wishes for the inclusion of this information to imply that she is more intelligent or accomplished than anyone else. The outdated meritocracy of intellectual achievement has made her a best-selling author multiple times and accorded her awards, including the Orange Prize. But she accepts that all of these accidental accolades are basically meaningless. Lionel lives in Brooklyn and in Portugal, where she is today, and we welcome you. Welcome to the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's nice to be back. I've done this before, and we had a great time before.
Well, I've heard they were great. I actually should have gone back and checked out the archive to begin with, but do us a favor and tell us a little bit about the basic premise of Mania.
Well, it's set in an alternative near past. So it begins in 2011. And it suddenly takes all of the U.S. by storm that there is no difference between people's intelligences. And everyone is equally smart. And any differences you might detect are simply processing issues. And therefore, cognitive discrimination is the next great civil rights fight. And it takes off from there. Now, I should clarify, it's not just clearly a political satire, but also a story about a friendship.
Yes.
Two women who have known each other since high school and been through a lot together. I hope we all have relationships like that. If we're lucky, we
Yes.
do. And we may underestimate how important they are to us in the scheme of things. Well, this relationship gradually becomes under strain and is eventually torn asunder over political differences regarding the so-called mental parity movement. And this is intentionally trying to address what I believe has happened all over the US in the last 10 to 15 years between individual people, and often it's friendships, it's sometimes families have stopped talking to each other. But I'm looking at the friendships, and I think this era of polarity and heightened political passion has been very hard on friendship. And I have lost a couple of friends myself, and I find there's a pattern. It's pretty reliably that the person to the left is the one who flounces out in disgust. I'm sure there are occasional exceptions to that rule, but I think that's usually the case. And I think these instances of long-term friendships just dying on the rocks of politics are tragic and gratuitous and involve our complete failure to remember what's important in life.
Right. The divisiveness that is clearly run rampant in the US and now in other parts of the world and with other political moments has in many ways kept us from being able to talk to one another. And what we're finding in your book, Mania, is that various characters are no longer even free to talk quietly amongst themselves about the issues of the day. And the example is that the lead character, Pearson Converse, has a son, interestingly named Darwin, and we can talk to that, who gets sent home from school because he used the S word, which is not the S word we all think of, but is the word stupid, if I'm allowed to say that. And in discussing this at home, both with her son and then later, Pearson has a conversation with her best friend, Emery, and her date of that evening, and finds herself in a bit of hot water. Are these the kind of conversations that you were encountering in your life as well? Was that the germ of this novel, or was there some other piece that set it off in motion?
The novel was mostly inspired by just taking a tiny step back from the last, I would say, about dozen years, and realizing that we have been serially roiled by hysterias, or I would call them social manias, hence the title. Suddenly, in about 2012, for example, we became culturally fixated on transgenderism, which, whatever you may think of it, it was weird, and it seemed to come out of nowhere. And then suddenly there were all these documentaries on television about little girls playing with guns and little boys wearing dresses. I mean, and it was like, where did this come from, and why are we so utterly obsessed with it virtually overnight? And I can identify other movements that came in quick succession: the Me Too movement, the COVID lockdowns, the Black Lives Matter thing after George Floyd, which I think we're still roiling in. And I sometimes wonder whether climate change has some of the same characteristics of a kind of collective derangement.
Sort of the hot topic of the day that even though nothing...
Actually, just beyond, we've always had hot topics of the day. So
what's different
it's a little more extreme than that, because it usually involves a specific orthodoxy, which you may not depart from. And, so extreme that in the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, you couldn't even post on Twitter, "All lives matter," people actually lost their jobs saying "all lives matter."
Mm-hmm.
And that's just, we've really reached the point of absurdity and extreme limitation on what it's possible to say. So in some ways, the subject matter of the book is not just, the war on meritocracy, which it's certainly looking at,
Mm-hmm.
but also this larger phenomenon of our susceptibility to being swept up in these obsessive movements and refusing to brook any kind of dissent. And these movements are very emotional. They're not necessarily based in fact or rationality. And I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I never get caught up in them. I don't know why. And that's what I gave to my character, Pearson Converse, is that she's just immune to groupthink. She doesn't get the virus.
Right.
And there are people like that. And I think one of the things that's been exciting to me, one of the few about the last dozen years, has been that it's distinguished a number of people who are not almost genetically inclined to go with the crowd and are capable of preserving the capacity for independent thought. And I find when suddenly everyone is talking about the same thing and saying the same thing, often using the same language, voicing the same limited numbers of ideas, and getting extremely upset when anybody even faintly disagrees with them, I find that whole thing really quite creepy. And it's one of the reasons that I used for Pearson's background, the fact that she was brought up as a Jehovah's Witness.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And that's a really oppressive religious faith. I don't envy children who are raised in it. It's really anti-fun, if nothing else. You don't even get to celebrate your birthday. And Pearson hates the joylessness of the faith and the way that you're told everything that you have to do. I mean, she just doesn't like being told what to do. But by the way, that I believe that is the core of my own character. But when you don't cooperate with the tenets of Jehovah's Witnesses, you get kicked out, and not only do you not go to church anymore, but your family won't speak to you. So when Pearson decides she can't go with this anymore at 16 years old, her whole family won't speak to her anymore, and doesn't for the rest of her life. It's really kind of horrifying. So she's already very early in her life paid a price for her principles.
Right. And then her counterpart is the friend whose family takes her in from high school, her lifelong friend, Emery, who is interesting in that she's really all over the place in terms of how she presents her positions and what she's willing to do to either defend the new legislation or repress her own previously held beliefs, or just float along with the times and go whichever way the wind is blowing. And she gets sort of accused by Pearson of just being an opportunist. And I'm wondering, is that was writing that character difficult or easier in some ways?
Well, there's so many people like that. It wasn't hard. Emery's very adaptive. I think she would prefer that word.
Okay.
Right. And there's a passage in the book that makes the case that it's really in your evolutionary interest to be adaptive, to get with the program sociologically, to to echo what everyone else is saying and not stick your neck out, because if you stick your neck out, you get your head chopped off.
Right.
So it makes a lot of sense on a self-preservational level that most people, whatever they think to begin with, just adapt to the latest ideology. It's easier. No one's going to attack you for it. And, you can hide in numbers. And then if it ends up just sort of dying down, you and everyone else can pretend you never believed that nonsense to begin with. I mean, and that's what happens.
So the alternative is silence. You could have had,
yes.
except for Emery's career, which was to be a public figure on television and with aspirations, or at least from radio to television, with aspirations for her career. If this hadn't been the topic everyone was talking about and the new standard way to talk about it, then she could have kept her mouth shut. And I think there's a whole element of that we don't really see so much. We see it in the character Wade a little bit. He's like, can't we just not talk about this?
Mm-hmm.
Though he's perhaps the one who's most egregiously affected by it. And what happens when you can't hire somebody because they are the best candidate, because there's no such thing as the best.
Yeah, Pearson's partner has the silent solution, as you note, that it's just like, leave me alone. I'm a tree surgeon. I don't care about this nonsense one way or another. I'm going to wait for it to be over. It doesn't have anything to do with me. And it is one approach to, all kinds of problems that your society may be going through, that you just keep your head down and wait for it to go away and hope that everyone leaves you alone. It's just that there are a lot of social phenomena which have such wide implications that you can't just be agnostic. And in his case, and I'm not going to tell the story because it would mess the book up for the readers that haven't read it, and I can't. Book is barely out, so I'm not assuming anyone has read it really. But Wade discovers, unfortunately, that there is nowhere to hide in this in this political landscape, and he, as you said, he ends up paying the highest price of anybody in the book.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about, I'm going to learn how to do this, I swear, Mania by Lionel Shriver, who is joining us from Portugal. And it's only out a couple days. I've read it and I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful statement and lots to learn about and to think about what happens when our society puts forth new ideologies that are both confusing, divisive, and how different people react, and what that does to a family and mostly to a friendship between the two lead characters, Pearson and Emery. I'm going to do a little name checking with you because you've named the community Voltaire, and both after the name of the town, and the university where Pearson teaches is Voltaire University. Were there particular thoughts about Voltaire, the philosopher and writer, that led you to that?
Well, Voltaire was an Enlightenment author and philosopher, and would certainly stand in for rationality. And he also wrote social satire, so he was really cruel, as the new ideology would have it, rather cruel to stupid people. So I thought that it was a good name for, I made up the town in Pennsylvania and the university. And I like sometimes to invent things like a location or an institution, because it means I can do whatever I want with them. and it doesn't rely on, I don't have to impugn a real university, for example. You can't criticize me for making fun of a university that doesn't exist, or I
Correct.
don't think you can. And it as a matter of fact, because this whole cognitive egalitarianism is very intolerant of arrogance and intellectual snobbery. Voltaire is kind of a symbol of just the kind of person that we have to disavow. He's a smartist.
He is. And I was a fan of Voltaire in my French lit days. So I looked up a couple quotes. The most famous in my mind is from Candide, all is for the best in the best of all possible worlds, which you can't argue with. Everything's best. But he also wrote, truly, whoever can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities, which in this book seems quite apt to
It's
this book.
Perfect.
So I was very happy to land upon that. You talked about characters and people needing to be adaptive and to survive. And we have Pearson, who named her first child Darwin. Can you talk a little bit about who Darwin is and what his name means or doesn't mean in this instance?
Well, Pearson has a pretty big dog in this fight because she was artificially inseminated with the same sperm donor's seed, and twice. So she had two children in pretty quick succession. And she selected the sperm donor. This was before cognitive egalitarianism, for his intelligence. And he had something like 143 IQ. And as a consequence, her children are unusually bright. One of them's quite artistically gifted and intuitive, and the other one is scientifically inclined. That's Darwin. And under ordinary circumstances, you would expect those kids to go far. They would excel in school. They had been excelling at school until a mental parity came along. And therefore, their mother finds it really upsetting when suddenly everyone is as smart as everyone else. And of course, that leads to the dumbing down of the curriculum across the board. There are no more schools for the gifted because there's no such thing as gifted. Everyone is the same. So obviously she finds that personally upsetting. And one thing that was useful for me to explore in terms of the emotional dynamics of the family is that she also has a child, her youngest, with her current partner, who doesn't benefit from that kind of selectivity of genetic intelligence. And there's nothing wrong with Lucy. She's boisterous and a little bit of a tattletale. But she's just not that smart, and doesn't especially respond to learning. It's not even that she struggles in school. It's just she's not interested. There are such people, and it doesn't make you immoral or anything. But given that Pearson has a lot of regard for intellectual achievement, it makes her a little frustrated with her youngest, and there's even a little suggestion that she's not the let's put it this way, she's not the perfect mother to
Correct.
Lucy, right? I think she's not entirely nice to Lucy, and that doesn't improve their relationship. You can tell that Pearson is much more passionate about her older two kids. And one of the things that I'm trying to do in the book, if you look at the larger plot, we're not going to get into the ending.
No.
Is actually intelligence isn't everything. It is one of many values and one of the many things that make people nice to be around or valuable to hire or important to get into school or whatever. So this isn't a novel that's arguing in any way that for some kind of rigid intellectual hierarchy and it's being hard on stupid people. I mean, and one of the things that I am interested in is the fact that the left, especially, is uncomfortable with natural inequality, and we're all victims of natural inequality. I don't have a very good singing voice, and I would love to have had a nice singing voice. My mother had a beautiful singing voice, and I don't know why I didn't inherit it.
Blame
But
Dad.
that's a kind of, I feel discriminated against at birth. I think the left doesn't like the fact that we're not all the same, right? And they're
That's
always
a pretty broad statement.
well, we're not. Yeah, after all, we're not all the same.
No,
and it's not fair. And gifts are distributed by nature unevenly.
yes,
Some people are great dancers. Some people have the gift of gab. Some people are incredibly smart and can solve, complex equations. I mean, and the left is obsessed with fairness, and I think this gets their goat. I mean, there's a Kurt Vonnegut story that I'm interested in. Everyone always remembers it, and most people don't remember short stories. But I can't count the number of people who've remembered this one, Welcome to the Monkey House. And it's about a world in the future where we've tried to correct all the unfairnesses. And so that people who are really good at music have to listen to noise in their headphones all the time, or anyone who's athletically gifted has to lug around these big lead weights so they can hardly move, etc. And it's symbolic of the kind of endpoint that you're headed towards if you really want to make everyone equal to everyone else.
Right. So your book is quite timely, given the divisive era we're in the U.S. around DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm not going to enter that topic because that's I think a longer topic and will take away from our discussion of the
too
book
scary.
and writing. And it's scary. I will agree there. So you have written many, many books, though we're not going to call you accomplished. And you've covered a lot of sort of broad topics, healthcare, national debt, the border wall, obesity, just to name a few. I know there was a whole list of them in an earlier quote. And I'm wondering, are you starting with a topic? Are you starting with a character? What happens when you decide, okay, I'm ready to write my next novel? Where does that come from for you?
It depends. It depends on the book. Sometimes I start with a broad area that I'm interested in and looking for a way in. Wanting to write a book about a subject is not an idea for a book. I need a concept, a hook, a premise of some sort. So I had in this instance, I liked the idea of inventing my own mania. I thought that was a good way into looking at the phenomenon of manias in general, to make a novel one, and then it would be easier for the reader to be outside it, and for the book to be outside of the immediate controversies that I'm alluding to. So, but I didn't have there was no book unless I came up with the mania. So a lot of it was just coming up with the mania. And Funnily enough, this was the first one I came up with, and then I toyed with a number of others, and I realized you came up with the right one to begin with.
So you were smart to begin with,
Yeah.
even though
I mean,
you can't
sometimes the answer to things is just staring you in the face.
be. Mm-hmm.
And then it was a matter of fashioning a story. It was really what happened with this book is it came together with two different ideas, because having recently been burnt by the loss of one friendship in particular,
Mm-hmm.
I was interested in examining that and
Mm-hmm.
examining that experience. I think friendship is sometimes underwritten about. We write about it a lot about romance, but less about friendship. So I love getting two things accomplished at once, and that's what I did, is put that together. And I ended up having a wonderful time writing this book. Honestly, it was a lot of fun. It was personally interesting. It was politically interesting, and it was entertaining on a page by page basis.
I've read that you said that you were laughing out loud at times as you were writing. Was it healing for you as well?
Yeah, it helped a little bit. I mean, in relation to what the severed friendship I'm talking about, I at least did something with it, right?
Okay, right. Something came out. Do you think this friendship uh, will be in any way further harmed or further helped by this book if your friend were to read it or read about it?
No, this person will never read my book. This person
Okay.
will never read another one of my books.
Okay. You in
So
an
I'm
interview,
safe. I could have written anything.
you could have. Who knows? Um, in an old interview that is still pops up on our friend Google frequently from Bomb Magazine back in 2005, I was surprised to see how long ago it was, given how uh, prominent it was in your search engine optimization. It said something about that you were quoted as saying, "My characters all have something horribly wrong with them." Why do you think that is? Because that predates some of these issues that you're talking about in with these particular characters.
Well, that's how I conceive of people. I can't really conceive of anyone as perfect, nor could I imagine wanting to write about someone who was perfect.
Mm-hmm.
It's just flat. And I mean, for example, the character of Pearson, she's very oppositional and therefore reactive, and admits that she's driven more by what she doesn't believe than by what she does.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a fundamentally negative character that she has been formed very primarily by that initial walking out on her family, which is a big deal. And walking out on the faith in which she was raised. And that's how she understands herself. But
Mm-hmm.
that's, that's a flaw. I mean, to mostly be made of that negative energy
Right.
is a weakness for her. And actually she is a self-aware enough to realize that.
And she's certainly, it's interesting that you said that she's sort of this obstructionist, because in some ways, Lucy is a bit like her in that
Yes.
I'm going to be my own self. I'm going to do it my way. I'm not going to adhere to the norms that you, mom, are setting for me, in the same way that Pearson, the mother, doesn't want to adhere to those norms either. It's just around a different subject. One's
Yeah.
around
I mean,
school.
they're both, you can't push me around. You can't
Right.
tell me what to do. And having that in common. I mean, this happens, I think, between
Yes,
parents and children a lot, that it's what you have in common that gets you into trouble.
absolutely. All right. This has been a great conversation between the two of us. I'm now going to open it up to some questions from our viewers. So this Trisha Blanchette writes, Ms. Shriver is so prolific. Does she have to take breaks between projects, or does she work on several different projects at once?
I never work on several projects at once fictionally. I have a column and I do intermittent journalism, and that's the only thing I take a break for when I'm working on a book. And it's funny because I start resenting the journalism because all I want to do is work on the book because that's where my heart is. I prefer to just start a book and finish it. And I do take breaks, not always by choice, because I can't start another book unless I have an idea for one. In fact, my deepest fear is not having an idea for my next book. And when I was younger, I was always a book ahead in my mind. So I knew what the next project was. And honestly, I don't work quite that fast anymore. And now I'm just up to it. You know, I went through a few months of not having an idea for my next book until last summer. I hit it. I'm already over halfway through. But without that, I feel lost and at sea and terrified, because you never know, honestly, whether you're going to reach this point where you just don't get another idea. And by idea, I mean something that someone hasn't written before and it's worth writing. And that's a higher bar than you might think.
Right. The fear of not finding it. We've had many discussion amongst the hosts and our guests of people who are just hit that point where they're absolutely certain that despite whatever previous success they've had in their career, that it's over, or it might be over right now. Tell us a little bit about I'll take this audience question, then I have another one for you. What do you hope your readers gain or learn from Mania?
It's a book that definitely encourages you to think for yourself and not go along with the herd, to always try to gain a little bit of perspective on the present, and to look twice at movements that are overtaking your society, to realize that, maybe the reason that I'm out marching for this cause isn't that I think it's important and I have personally been persuaded, but because everyone else is doing it, and so I might as well too. So I'm questioning that kind of bandwagoning reasoning, and trying to make you a little more aware of the kind of huge hysterical movements that we're being subject to. And beyond that, you know, my biggest aim with any novel is that you enjoy it along the way. I'm not so much trying to shove a moral of the story down your throat. As long as you have a good time reading this book, I have achieved my objective.
Great. Can you talk for a minute about your column and how often it's running? And is there a seesawing between topics or similarities or differences?
I write a fortnightly column in The Spectator in the UK, which often runs in the monthly version in the United States called Spectator World. The Spectator is one of the oldest magazines, I think, in the world, certainly in the UK. And it represents a broad range of opinion, but would probably be considered on average center-right. Okay. Which I never would have considered myself before, but the political landscape has reconfigured, and I'm certainly in the center, whereas I would previously have been in the left. My topics range widely, but there are certain subjects that I'm especially drawn to. I have written about transgenderism and have risked a critical word
yes.
Back when it was extremely dangerous. I write a lot about immigration. I am a skeptic on mass immigration. That also gets me into lots of trouble. I am not a big fan of affirmative action, which, if you read Mania, will be glaring to you. And that also has offended a lot of people. I write some about economics, which I got very interested in when I wrote The Mandibles, which came out in 2016.
It's a great
And
name.
I'm very concerned about debt, and particularly sovereign debt.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I write about plastic.
Plastic?
Yeah, I'm more upset about plastic than I am about climate change.
Okay. All right. Chuck, I understand we have more questions. I missed the first part of today's interview, so perhaps this has already been answered. To what does the title imply? Also, we need to talk about Kevin has really stuck with me, so thank you. So,
Okay, yeah, I think we did explain this earlier in the interview, but I don't mind repeating myself. It's Mania is really looking at the phenomenon of the social mania, or it's also called mass formation psychosis. And it's a collective hysteria or a collective derangement, which just takes over an entire society. And lately, they're international. So, for example, when Me Too just went nuts, it went nuts all over the world. And I find that a little unsettling. So I invented a mania for this novel, a social mania, but I'm also looking at the larger phenomenon of the social mania, and that's what the title's from.
Let me ask a question. It sounds as if, and this may be presumptive, that the idea of any mania, regardless of the topic, is what concerns you. Or is it really the particular manias that we're having now? I mean, there have been manias in the past. Let's say Third Reich Nazism,
Right.
one could say that's a mania. That's actually, a mania, but you can look at the subject and say, yeah, that one's not. I see how it happened, and I'm horrified by it. But I could imagine some people, and I would probably include myself in this, the Me Too mania was a long time coming. And for women in male-dominated workplaces, it was like, finally. Was it too much? Do these things become too much because of social media? Are they worse now? I mean, they've
Yeah,
always
I
been
think so.
manias.
I was totally on board with Me Too to begin with, but it went too far, and it went after a lot of people who didn't deserve it, which is a pity because it was addressing something real and something important to begin with. So, I mean, I just watched it change,
I see.
and it got pettier and more vengeful. Harvey Weinstein had got everything he had coming to him. So I didn't lose any sympathy on that one. And there were several other instances where men had been chancing their arms for a long time and got their comeuppance, and justice was done. But it just kept going, and that was the problem. And that's part of the nature of what I'm talking about. But as you mentioned, am I concerned with the phenomenon or just these instances in the last 12 years? The phenomenon. Because if you look at some of the more serious instances, I mean, Me Too is very small in importance in comparison to Mao's Cultural Revolution.
Correct.
I mean, that killed, 30 million people?
Right.
It was actually, I think he killed, certainly between Stalin and Mao, they killed way more people than World War II.
Wow.
So, and what happened in Cambodia with Pol Pot in the killing fields, it was grotesque. And that was definitely a social mania. So in some ways, my novel is addressing something that is on a smaller moral scale than the kind of thing that we have been taken by in the past. And therefore, our susceptibility for collective derangement is terrifying to me. I mean, there's a passage toward the end of the book where Pearson addresses herself to all the kinds of atrocities we're talking about, the Nazi concentration camps, et cetera, and says, she used to find them baffling and confounding. It's like, how could anyone do this? How could any society be reduced to this? And now they seem perfectly understandable
Yes.
to her. She's watched enough people go nuts, basically, in mass, that now it makes sense. Of course, people will believe anything. And therefore, we have to be very watchful of what we, buy into, because we are capable in groups of going crazy. And I think people more commonly go nuts in groups than they do as individuals. I've always found it, I'm unhappy in crowds, especially kind of close crowds that are operating as one, cheering and shouting and chanting, and I feel left out and I want to leave. I don't naturally get with crowds. I don't go to sporting. I mean, I'm actually missing out on a certain kind of pleasure. I think there is a pleasure, the crowd pleasure of getting excited that your team just made a point, that kind of thing. And I don't ever have that. So, but I'm willing to sacrifice that if it means that I'm not, making Nazi salutes along with everyone else.
There you go. All right. Well, one last audience question here. What would you say is the key to a long and steady writing career?
Well, of course, writing's a habit. So you never get out of the habit. Otherwise, not okay. First, doing whatever you want, because that's, there are a lot of downsides to writing, especially professionally. And if you want to make a lot of money, it's not a good bet anyway. But it also allows for enormous freedom. So ignore all the little rules that we're being dished out continually lately about what you can and cannot do, and write whatever you want. Please yourself, which doesn't mean being approving about everything. It doesn't. You still have to be able to recognize a bad sentence when you've written it, and believe me, I write my share. But have a good time. I mean, I've never understood writers who claim that they find writing an exercise in suffering. That's alien to me. And if I'm suffering, well, it usually means I have a book review due. I'm so sick of writing book reviews. I think it's just the form I've had enough of with just, oh, now it's time to write, use a quote and do a summary. And I'm sick of it. So I understand what it feels like to write and be miserable. Usually I've accepted an assignment. I don't have any choice. It's not a matter of mood. Just shut up, stop putting it off, and get it over with. So yeah, that's suffering. But I don't experience writing fiction that way. And I don't understand why you would want to write fiction if it was painful. After all, it's not, in my view, it's not supposed to be painful to read. It's not a medicinal exercise. It's what you do with your leisure time, and it's supposed to be fun and enriching and engaging. And I think that it needs to be that way when you write it. It doesn't mean you don't come up against, oh my God, I don't know what happens next. I just got to a chapter in my current manuscript, and it's like, oh, I haven't thought about this at all. I have no idea how to do this. I don't know who these characters are. I've planned vaguely to do something here, but I don't know what it is. And yeah, I tend to just go back to the previous chapter and fix, little punctuation things
Instead of moving forward.
delay. So it's not as if I'm not unfamiliar with fictional terror. You just don't. You're just looking at a cliff edge. But that, all that stuff's surmountable. And sometimes you do have to stop for a minute and say, oh, I haven't thought this through. Okay, go do the dishes or go for a walk and try to sort it out. And sometimes, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes also it doesn't work to think about something directly. That's why I would say go for a walk. When you force yourself to try to solve a problem. This probably goes for lots of problems and not just problems in writing novels. But I certainly find that the solution to the questions I can't answer, I don't know how else to put it, but that it comes in from the side, right? It's almost like it comes in your ear instead of your eye.
That makes sense.
It's the part of your brain that isn't focused. It's just open. And that's how you get the best ideas. And that's how I've got almost all the ideas I've got for novels, those premises, those big premises that have made the book possible. They've always come in from the side when I was sort of thinking about something else.
That's great to hear. It's lovely to know as a writer, and for all our book loving and writing fans out there on the Blaze, that we all still get that moment of terror and you can get through it. And when you do, you come up with a wonderful book like Mania by Lionel Shriver. It came out this past Tuesday, and it'll make you think, it'll make you laugh, it'll make you think differently about what's changing in our world and what is absurd and what isn't, as our friend Voltaire would say. Thank you so much for joining us, Lionel. And to our viewers, we're here on The Blaze. You can find this interview and all of our others on our YouTube channel. We hope you will subscribe. As you know, we do have a newsletter that comes out weekly that has the full schedule of all of our shows. So please subscribe to that at our website, www.amityblaze.com. And find us and like us and follow us on all of the social media. We promise we will not participate in too many social manias, but we are out there regularly promoting books and authors and giving you a lot of good ideas about what to read next. So thank you very much, Lionel. And thank you to our audience. Happy weekend.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.